Jessica's voice trembled as she spoke.
3 months pregnant?
Alexander scrutinized the pregnancy test report in his hand, his expression particularly stern.
Get rid of it.
Jessica was completely stunned, her mind blank. She had thought that having a child might improve their relationship, but Alexander was so heartless.
Alexander, if you don't want to acknowledge it, I can raise the child myself.
Get rid of it.
Alexander's lips curled into a cold smile.
I won't raise another man's child for you.
Jessica's fingers trembled with anger.
Alexander, you're slandering me. You're the only man I've ever been with. Who else's child could it be?
Alexander looked at her with disdain.
Either get rid of it or get out of here. Jessica, do you really think I don't know what people say about you? A loose woman. Tell me, whose child is it?
Jessica's face turned pale.
What?
Alexander sneered, unwilling to say more. He tore up the pregnancy test report and grabbed Jessica's slender neck, his voice violent.
I've had a vasectomy. How could there be a child?
Jessica's eyes widened.
How could it be?
He was the head of the powerful Alexander family. Without a child to inherit the family business, how could he have had a vasectomy?
My child can only be born by Emily. 5 years ago, you hit Emily with your car, causing her to be unable to conceive. If she can't have children, I won't allow any other child.
Jessica's heart was filled with anger and bitterness, and she couldn't help but shed tears.
Jessica, just because I'm married you doesn't mean you can deceive me and use someone else's child to climb up.
Jessica was almost suffocated by his grip, but she still managed to squeeze out a few words.
Let's do a paternity test.
Alexander sneered, grabbed her long hair, and threw Jessica to the ground.
Today is Emily's birthday. I don't want to waste time with you.
Alexander lit a cigarette, the smoke making his eyes look cold. He ordered the bodyguards.
Take her to the hospital and terminate the pregnancy.
Several men in black immediately stepped forward and restrained Jessica.
No! Alexander, he really is your child. I've never been with another man.
Alexander sneered and showed her a few photos. Jessica glanced at them.
Impossible. Someone must be framing me.
Alexander spoke impatiently.
Are you all useless? Drag her out of here.
Jessica was dragged out by the bodyguards, her lower abdomen hitting the cold floor hard, leaving a trail of blood. She lost consciousness from the pain and didn't know how long it was before she was placed on the operating table.
Mr. Alexander, did Mrs. Alexander fall on the way here? The child is misaligned. Forcing the procedure might damage the uterus.
Damage?
She might not be able to conceive again.
Jessica weakly closed her eyes, her heart tightening.
Jessica, you caused Emily to be unable to conceive. I can't bear to let you be unable to conceive now.
Jessica's heart trembled. Did he really have some feelings for her? But then she heard Alexander's cold laugh.
After all, when you wake up, you still have to bear a child for me and Emily.
Alexander spoke impatiently. Are you all useless? Drag her out of here. Jessica was dragged out by the bodyguards, her lower abdomen hitting the cold floor hard, leaving a trail of blood. She lost consciousness from the pain and didn't know how long it was before she was placed on the operating table.
Mr. Alexander, did Mrs. Alexander fall on the way here? The child is misaligned. Forcing the procedure might damage the uterus.
Damage?
She might not be able to conceive again.
Jessica weakly closed her eyes, her heart tightening.
Jessica, you caused Emily to be unable to conceive. I can't bear to let you be unable to conceive now.
Jessica's heart trembled. Did he really have some feelings for her? But then she heard Alexander's cold laugh.
After all, when you wake up, you still have to bear a child for me and Emily. Are you all useless? Drag her out of here.
Jessica was dragged out by the bodyguards, her lower abdomen hitting the cold floor hard, leaving a trail of blood. She lost consciousness from the pain and didn't know how long it was before she was placed on the operating table.
Mr. Alexander, did Mrs. Alexander fall on the way here? The child is misaligned. Forcing the procedure might damage the uterus.
Damage?
She might not be able to conceive again.
Jessica weakly closed her eyes, her heart tightening.
Jessica, you caused Emily to be unable to conceive. I can't bear to let you be unable to conceive now.
Jessica's heart trembled. Did he really have some feelings for her? But then she heard Alexander's cold laugh.
After all, when you wake up, you still have to bear a child for me and Emily.
Tension filled the air as Alexander's rage boiled over.
Are you all useless? Drag her out of here.
Jessica was forcefully removed by the bodyguards, her lower abdomen hitting the cold floor hard, leaving a trail of blood. She lost consciousness from the pain and didn't know how long it was before she was placed on the operating table.
Mr. Alexander, did Mrs. Alexander fall on the way here? The child is misaligned. Forcing the procedure might cause significant damage.
Damage?
She might not be able to conceive again.
Jessica weakly closed her eyes, her heart tightening.
Jessica, you caused Emily to be unable to conceive. I can't bear to let you be unable to conceive now.
Jessica's heart trembled. Did he really have some feelings for her?
After all, when you wake up, you still have to bear a child for me and Emily.
Alexander, I didn't.
A nearby playboy urged loudly.
Alexander, you lost the bet just now. You haven't told us what you're putting up as a stake.
Her. Tonight, Jessica is yours.
What do you take me for? I'm still carrying your child, Alexander.
Jessica was pulled into his arms, but the embrace was not warm. Instead, it was chillingly cold.
Isn't this what you like? I'll satisfy you.
Not just anger, but a hint of jealousy. Impossible. Alexander must just feel that she embarrassed him. Jessica kept denying it, but her heart felt as if a piece had been gouged out. Alexander threw her to the ground.
Jessica used to be a famous beauty in the capital. She's enough as a stake.
The man whom Jessica had pushed aside earlier stepped forward, reaching to pull at her dress.
Alexander, save me.
Jessica panicked, trying to escape, but how could her strength compare to that of a grown man? The drunken man laughed wildly.
Didn't you hear? Mr. Alexander said you're ours. Do you really think you're the legitimate Mrs. Alexander? Showing off here? Let me tell you, Mr. Alexander only has Emily in his heart. As for you.
Jessica stared straight at Alexander. Alexander turned his gaze to the bustling night scene outside the window, his eyes never landing on Jessica.
See, you're just a discarded woman. Playing with you today is giving you face.
With that, he forcefully tore at her clothes. Seeing her shoulder exposed, Alexander suddenly extinguished his cigarette, and the ashtray was smashed to the ground.
Stop!
Jessica looked up. She almost cried from the emotion. But the warmth in her heart lasted less than a second before she heard Alexander's cold voice.
I've changed my mind. Let's do something more interesting, like strip dance.
Alexander, it was Emily who harmed me. Why take it out on me?
The man looked down at her.
If your dance doesn't satisfy me, you can stay here.
Jessica stared straight at Alexander. This was the man she had loved for so many years.
Alexander, you have no heart.
He not only trampled on her love but also her dignity. She stood up, her hand falling on the buttons of her clothes.
Hurry up. Faster.
Jessica took a deep breath. Then, 1 button, 2 buttons. Suddenly, her vision blurred, and before she could react, Alexander dragged her to the washroom. Alexander suddenly stopped, and Jessica, unable to stand steadily, hit her forehead on the sink. When she looked up, she saw her reflection in the mirror, blood flowing down her forehead, half her face covered in a ghastly red, extremely terrifying.
Alexander, isn't this what you wanted? Let me go back.
Alexander pinned her down.
So enthusiastic? How many of those inside are your old flames?
What, Alexander, are you jealous?
I'm just afraid your scandal will hurt Emily.
Sure enough, she was being delusional.
Let me go back.
Jessica pushed him hard. But the man's chest was as hard as iron, unmoving.
No.
Jessica's eyes stung.
Then what do you want me to do?
Go back to the private room and drink with me. That's what a companion should do.
Jessica lowered her head, drawing a line between them. She was pregnant, the baby inside her was fragile, and drinking was a big taboo.
There's a big gambling feast on the 3rd floor. If you don't want to be thrown down as a prize, just listen to me.
I'm not going. Alexander, I can't drink.
Alexander frowned, coldly shaking her off. Jessica fell to the ground, her abdomen hurting, blood flowing.
Alexander, take me to the hospital.
Alexander remained indifferent.
A tiger doesn't eat its cubs, save him, and we'll divorce. I will never bother you and Emily again.
Deal. Sign it first, then I'll save you.
Alexander threw a document in front of her. Jessica looked at the divorce agreement that had already been signed. He had prepared it long ago. Alexander really hated her to the bone. Jessica laughed bitterly, enduring the pain, and signed her name. She supported herself against the wall, trying to stand up, but her vision blurred, and she fainted. When she woke up, Patrick was sitting by the bed.
What about the baby in my belly?
It's safe, you.
Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted him. Immediately after, Alexander's bodyguard walked in with a stern face. Jessica clutched the blanket tightly. Were they still here to force her to terminate the pregnancy?
Mrs. Jessica, Mr. Alexander is getting engaged today and has specially sent you an invitation.
Jessica then remembered that Alexander had forced her to sign the divorce papers in the dark. If time could go back, she wished she had been hurt more severely and woken up later. She couldn't bear to watch Alexander marry someone else.
Oh, and Mrs. Emily said that there aren't enough seats for the guests, so you should stand on the side and not appear in front of Mr. Alexander.
The bodyguard sneered at her, left the invitation, and turned to leave. The door closed. Jessica bit her lip, looking at the invitation, and gradually made up her mind. Beck was the most luxurious place in the capital. As soon as Jessica entered, she heard a commotion.
Next, the couple will exchange rings.
Alexander, today is the happiest day of my life.
At the same time, a scream suddenly came from the door.
It's Jessica! Didn't she already divorce Mr. Alexander?
The media immediately swarmed around Jessica. She had to protect her belly with her hands, fearing for the fragile baby.
Miss Jessica, your belly is swollen. Are you pregnant?
Jessica looked up and met Alexander's icy gaze. But she had no way out.
Yes.
As soon as she spoke, there was an uproar.
Bodyguard, get her out.
Alexander, I'm carrying your child.
Jessica, the child in your belly isn't mine.
The bodyguard beside him threw a few photos on the ground with a snap, and someone immediately exclaimed.
Are these photos of Jessica?
The media, like dogs smelling a bone, rushed to where the photos were. Jessica was pushed aside, her forehead hitting the wall, swelling into a bruise. But the pain on her face was nothing compared to the pain in her heart. She never expected Alexander to publicly humiliate her with such photos.
That's not me. Alexander, you can think I'm vicious, but I really love you.
No one cares about your love.
The photos were picked up by Alexander's bodyguard from the ground and forcefully thrown in her face.
Miss Jessica, get out early, or don't blame us for releasing your photos from the nightclub.
She had just taken a few steps when someone suddenly pushed her from behind, causing her to roll down the stairs at the hotel entrance. Lying on the ground, she heard a crack as her calf broke. Emily immediately approached her with her expensive wedding dress.
Sister.
Jessica gritted her teeth and stood up, protecting her belly, trying to avoid her. But Emily forcefully grabbed her hand, then screamed and pushed her to the ground. The specially made crystal crown on her head fell to the ground, shattering into countless pieces. Some of them directly pierced Jessica's face as she fell to the ground. Jessica almost fainted from the pain, but was quickly awakened by the pain in her abdomen.
Get out of the way, I need to go to the hospital.
Sister, I'll take you.
Get lost!
Two voices sounded simultaneously, and Emily was pushed away by Jessica, almost falling to the ground. Alexander stepped forward, his eyes full of cruelty.
Who allowed you to lay a hand on Emily?
Alexander grabbed her wrist forcefully.
Move aside! Apologize to Emily, or you can forget about saving that child.
Jessica's body swayed, her eyes reddened as she looked at Alexander.
It's all my fault. I was delusional, wanting to take Emily's place. Alexander, I beg you, please save my child's life.
The biggest mistake of her life was falling in love with Alexander. From then on, there was no turning back. Alexander's expression was terrifyingly grim as he stepped forward and gripped her neck tightly. Jessica's face turned an unnatural shade of red from lack of oxygen, but she still managed to squeeze out a few words.
I was wrong, but the child did nothing wrong.
Alexander let out a cold laugh and threw her aside harshly. Jessica gasped in pain.
Jessica, I didn't act against you at the wedding because I didn't want to leave any evidence for Emily. Next time, you, your unborn child, and the entire family, I won't show any mercy.
With that, Alexander wrapped his arm around Emily and turned to leave. Jessica looked at his cold back, her voice hoarse.
Then end my misery now. Crush me, it's easier than crushing an ant. I can't bear this life anymore.
Living was just being tortured. This child, once born, would also be under the control of the family. It would be better to end it all. Alexander turned around, striding towards her, his calloused hand gripping her jaw tightly, his voice low.
Until I allow it, you don't have the right to decide your own fate.
Because of Alexander's words, her dead heart felt a trace of warmth.
Alexander, tell me, did you ever like me, even just a little?
Alexander let out a mocking laugh.
How could I ever love a scheming woman like you? Jessica, if you died, I would light up the whole city in celebration.
He pushed her away, lit a cigarette, and turned to leave. Jessica stood there, touching her cheek, only to feel the cold blood. She watched as Alexander, holding Emily, walked back into the hotel, letting the blood drip from her face, unable to move because of the injury to her leg. Slowly, her consciousness began to blur.
You kidnapped me?
How can you call it kidnapping? I just found some fun for you, since no one wants you after you became a discarded woman.
With that, Emily waved her hand, and the men who had kidnapped Jessica earlier immediately approached.
Remember to take lots of photos and videos, and send them to me.
Jessica struggled to stand, retreating continuously. The men laughed, their greasy faces full of lewdness, stepping closer to Jessica. With no way out, Jessica pretended to be calm and looked at Emily.
Emily, I'm leaving the city tomorrow. I won't bother you and Alexander anymore.
How could I allow you to leave with the child? He must not survive. Don't think I don't know you want to use this child to threaten the family.
She lowered her head, a strange smile on her face.
Jessica, today I'll post your video online, let the whole city know you're a promiscuous woman. Do you think the family will still want you then?
As soon as she finished speaking, the men pounced on her like madmen. Narrator, tone, Sirius Alexander spoke impatiently, glaring at the assembled bodyguards.
Are you all useless? Drag her out of here.
Jessica was dragged out by the bodyguards, her lower abdomen hitting the cold floor hard, leaving a trail of blood. She lost consciousness from the pain and didn't know how long it was before she was placed on the operating table.
Mr. Alexander, did Mrs. Alexander fall on the way here? The child is misaligned. Forcing the procedure might damage the uterus.
Damage?
She might not be able to conceive again.
Jessica weakly closed her eyes, her heart tightening.
Jessica, you caused Emily to be unable to conceive. I can't bear to let you be unable to conceive now.
Narrator, tone, sad. Jessica's heart trembled. Did he really have some feelings for her? But then she heard Alexander's cold laugh.
After all, when you wake up, you still have to bear a child for me and Emily.
It turned out, it was all her wishful thinking. Alexander wished she would disappear. How could he care whether she and the baby would survive?
Alexander, you can't be so heartless. This is your only child. You can't joke about his life. The old man won't agree.
With every word she spoke, the wound in her throat tore a little more, and blood gushed out.
I told you, if you touched Emily, I would never let you go.
Alexander grabbed her hair, his face suddenly dark. After saying that, he left without any hesitation. The doctor forcefully inserted a long needle into her arm, one injection after another.
Doctor, I beg you, call the Alexander family.
Jessica then immediately coughed up a large mouthful of blood.
Miss Jessica, I advise you not to struggle. No one survives when Mr. Alexander wants them gone.
Now, he wanted that child gone. More and more blood was drawn, and slowly, her consciousness began to fade. The man's noble yet impatient voice sounded.
Dispose of the blood.
Jessica was almost going mad. That wasn't just blood, it was her child. Tears fell, soaking the bed sheets. Jessica opened her mouth, silently mouthing.
Alexander, in the next life, I never want to meet you again, never.
The light gradually blurred, but Jessica's body became more and more relaxed. She gave up. She didn't want to love Alexander anymore. Jessica was hemorrhaging. She was in critical condition. On the hospital bed in the operating room, blood stained Alexander's vision red.
Jessica! You are not allowed to die!
For some reason, he felt a deep panic. Seeing the line on the monitor about to go flat, he felt a sense of despair. Could it be that he had fallen in love with Jessica? Outside the operating room, Jessica had been inside for a whole day and night. Alexander stood at the door the entire time, like a statue, motionless.
If I'm not mistaken, that's Alexander. He's really devoted, waiting here for over 30 hours.
Alexander? Isn't Mrs. Alexander Emily? If I remember correctly, she's in the ward downstairs.
Alexander's eyelashes trembled slightly. A great fear engulfed him. It seemed that he and Jessica had missed each other in this life. The piercing beep sounded like a sharp knife stabbing into Alexander's heart. Jessica was gone. Both she and the baby. Alexander went mad. He couldn't believe it, but the woman's ceased heartbeat told him she was really gone. She had left his world. Emily was imprisoned. The truth about what happened back then and the kidnapping case came to light. Everything Jessica said was true. But it wasn't until she died that Alexander believed her. 3 years ago, a major event shocked the entire city. Alexander attempted to end his life by consuming poison. It was said to be a deadly poison. Just one drop could make life unbearable, but Alexander drank an entire bottle. Later, he miraculously recovered, but his personality changed drastically. He became even more ruthless and personally sent Emily to prison. Some said he was atoning for his past actions. Because of his arrogance and pride, he caused the death of the woman he loved, his wife Jessica. Others said that Alexander wanted to die, but Jessica protected him from above, allowing him to survive. The Alexander family's power grew stronger, but Alexander never remarried. He held his deceased wife's memorial tablet and spent the rest of his life with her.